Okay, I'm in your camera stream. No, you might want to move your camera a little bit over. I mean, since it's backwards. Oh yeah, no. Maybe I need to get out the frame. Hmm?
Okay. No, I don't want you to get out the frame. Let me see. Unless you want to. You want to move over a little bit?
Let me see.
Scoot, scoot.
That's it. I'll go over here.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jackie Lukman.
And I'm at the Shahid Lukman.
And this is Coffee Current Events and Politics live at 5, our weekly live YouTube stream broadcast for Coffee Current Events and Politics. I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes to grab some stuff and make sure we've got all our stuff straight because we got a couple of topics we want to really dig into today. It's been a really very interesting day for us. We've not been feeling well, but we've been filling our brains with a lot of information. And man, everything you really want to know about what's going on in the world, it's out there if you
Yes,
want it.
yes, yes.
The problem is you have to be careful not to overload yourself on that information. Hey Sandy, how you doing? See you. Hey Alita, hey, what's up? Hey George, thank you guys for coming. A couple of, well, not early. We are a little behind as usual. You know, we're on CP time. We don't mean to be, but what can I say? Um, wow, where do we start? Okay, let me get this out of the way because I think this was kind of overlooked this week with all of the Trump psychosis going on, his regular BS. Um, it was missed that the civil trial testimony from Darren Wilson was released like on Tuesday or Wednesday. People completely missed that. I mean, it was just there was so much going on with everything else that was going on in the world that people completely missed that that grand jury testimony was released. And honestly, to be fair and honest, there was nothing new in the transcript from the grand jury, from the civil trial, I guess, testimony that wasn't in the grand jury testimony. It was the story, his lies were the same, his statements were the same, the stories were the same. But I started thinking, and you chime in whenever you need to, hon. And I have to, you have to bear with me because we have this new camera set up where I now have a camera for Abdus, and I have to go find it. Let's see. Here we
There
go.
we go.
There he is. Yeah,
Hey.
there he is. Wave, honey. So, so but I have to use his handsome mug in the camera. But he's sitting behind me, so I have to be careful not to like turn around and talk to him and ignore you guys. So if I do that, just please forgive me because I'm just not used to it
No,
yet.
we're still working on
But I was thinking as I was reading through the testimony, and I was reading especially Jonathan Capehart's uh, defense of his um, statement when the trial first happened and the protests popped off, and the hands up, don't shoot narrative was out. And Capehart's whole argument, Jonathan Capehart is a journalist for the Washington Post, and his whole argument in the entire thing, in this entire Mike Brown incident, was that the hands up, don't shoot narrative was based on a lie, right? And it was because of that the Department of Justice couldn't find any evidence to prove inconclusively that Mike Brown didn't have his hands up. That he felt like the protests that sparked because that were using that slogan were illegitimate. And I've always contended that that's a BS argument because all that does is deflect from the actual facts of the case. And because you've got people who want to excuse Darren Wilson's actions as justified because Mike Brown allegedly committed a crime before that Wilson actually didn't even know anything about when he approached Mike Brown and his friend on the street that day. Darren Wilson was doing what Ferguson police had been proven to do to harass and arrest and detain poor black people in Ferguson for years and make money off of them in like a debtor's prison. And that's just to stop people on the street and issue them BS tickets for ridiculous misdemeanor offenses, quote unquote offenses, like jaywalking. Which is why Darren Wilson encountered Mike Brown in the first place that day. He didn't know anything about this incident at the convenience store. He didn't know anything about anybody calling the police on Mike Brown. He didn't know anything about that. All he knew was, oh, this is another opportunity for me to fulfill my ticket quota and make some more money for my police department. Let me stop these two N-words who are walking in the street so I can do what we do. The Department of Justice report confirmed that the Ferguson Police Department um, uh, participated in a pattern and a practice of racial discrimination and harassment right along those lines, issuing those bogus tickets, exactly what Darren Wilson was doing that day. But people have been fixated on what Mike Brown allegedly did at the convenience store, right? Well, apparently now this video has come out from the convenience store earlier in the day, which disputes the narrative that Mike Brown even committed a crime at all, which I've always disputed. But I didn't have the proof. But this video that surfaced that the Ferguson Police Department and the prosecutor are now saying doesn't matter. It doesn't have any bearing on the case. It doesn't make any difference. My question is, if it didn't make any difference, why would you suppress it in the first place? Do you understand what I'm saying? If the videotape didn't have any bearing on the case, if the videotape didn't matter, if what was shown in the videotape was inconsequential, why would you not release it until now? So there's this video that calls into question this whole narrative of Mike Brown stealing anything from the store. But then, even if we didn't have that, what I've always said about what Darren Wilson did that day should have overshadowed anything Mike Brown was accused of doing, was proven to have done. What Darren Wilson did that day and has admitted to twice under oath should have been the story. And it should have been a textbook example of abusive policing in America, but it wasn't. Because not only did we have the usual suspects calling into question Mike Brown's character because of his alleged crime of stealing a pack of cigars in the convenience store, which is, that's just, come on.
Well, I mean, which the store owner himself said didn't happen.
Exactly. And now the videotape calls into question that very narrative in the first place.
Right.
But the fact that Darren Wilson admitted under oath twice now that he reached and grabbed for Mike Brown through the window of his car while he was still sitting in his car as Mike Brown was on the street. He pulls his car in front of Brown and his friend. He has the window down. He reaches out of his car as a first contact with Mike Brown, reached for him, grabbed for him, and grabbed his arm. He admitted to that under oath. But somehow that wasn't the story. The story was that Mike Brown was a hulking animal and he was a criminal. Not that a cop who is supposed to be trained in proper procedure pulls his service vehicle in front of two citizens and physically accosts one of them without telling him why he's stopping him, without nothing. Then Darren Wilson admits that Mike Brown never tried to take his gun out of his holster while he was in the car. Darren Wilson then admits that he pulled his gun on Mike Brown as he was holding onto him and shot that young man while he was sitting in his squad car. Let me stop right there. Because this is where a lot of people talk about Darren Wilson being punched in the face. And this is why, above all else, Mike Brown deserved to die because he assaulted a police officer. This is just me. And maybe I'm a little bit insane. But if anybody puts their hands on me in aggression, I am going to fight back. And I have the right to do that as an American citizen. See, we have this narrative in this country that you can't defend yourself if it's the police who assault you. And nowhere is that written in law, by the way. Am I wrong on that?
Well, I mean, maybe a lot of folks out there might be wondering, well, why are we talking about this now? I mean, Mike Brown's situation happened, what, about a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
And with Mike Brown, that that started the motion for Black Lives Matter and started a whole lot of things. But the reason every time one of every time one of these type of incidents has happened, whether it was Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, Philando Castile, I mean, we go on and on and on. Trayvon Martin, which preceded Mike Brown. It was always, let's not rush to judgment. It was always, let's see what the facts are. It was always, the videotape doesn't prove everything, and let's see what the facts are. Yet those who were at the losing end of a cop's gun never received that type of consideration. Mm-hmm. Mike Brown, no one ever said that, Mike Brown was innocent until all the facts came out. No, Mike Brown was immediately labeled a thug. His stepfather, I believe at the time, his jail record was out there, mm-hmm. and everything was done to sway public opinion against Mike Brown while he still was laying there dead, uncovered on asphalt
for 4 hours.
For 4 hours. The same thing we can say with Trayvon Martin. The narrative about Trayvon Martin is still that he beat up George Zimmerman and so he deserved to be killed. Mm-hmm. The narrative for Tamir Rice is the fact that he was big enough to that now the narrative on Tamir Rice is it's denied the operator's fault.
Right.
For not relaying the proper information to the officers who are supposed to be trained. So right. So the 911 officer did not say that this was a child who relayed the information that this may be a child who has a toy gun or something like that. Yet the officers, if that was, I mean, it was 2 seconds upon arrival of the officers when they shot a 12-year-old kid. So once again, reason why we're revisiting this because in the beginning everyone said, well, let the facts. Let everybody do their job. Mm-hmm. Let the facts come out, and before we rush to judgment and blame Darren Wilson, before we rush to judgment. But the ones who are at the losing end of the gun, mainly black men, never receive that type of consideration. While before their body is removed off the street, their criminal record is already out there if they have one. Even with Tamir Rice, who's 12 years old, he was already being blamed for even playing with a toy gun.
Right, that's right.
So public opinion was always swayed to blame the victim for being at the losing end of a cop's gun, mm-hmm. and that on the other side, no matter what the cops do, whether it was negligence or unprofessionalism, whatever it was that resulted in this tragedy, then all of a sudden it's like, we can't blame the cop. Mm-hmm. We saw that same action done when a police officer when a citizen called the Chicago police officer to come and help him with his bipolar son,
right?
And the cop wound up killing the grandmom who opened the door for him,
right? And the bipolar
son, and yet turned around and sued.
Sued the father.
The father, right? So I mean, so the reason why we have to constantly keep on coming back to this is because it's all about justice, and that's what it is. We can't, we're really good in this country of moving on to the next story. You know, okay, Mike Brown is done. Let's go on to this. Let's go on to that. Let's go on to this. But no, these things aren't done.
Right.
And as we see, as we do wait for all of the facts, we find out that everything we've been told is not what it was.
Right, right. And then, I mean, so the reason we bring this back up again, uh-oh, I'm gone. Here I am. So the reason we bring this back up again is because what Abdus just said, this narrative of, look, we have to all do our job, let everybody do their jobs, and we can't rush to judgment, and look, we can't blame the cop. But in his own testimony, there was plenty to blame the cop for. There was plenty to blame Darren Wilson for from the very beginning. The fact that he reached out of his squad car to physically accost this young man without telling him why he was stopping him at all in the first place. The fact that he admitted to shooting Mike Brown while he had his hand on his arm as he was sitting in the squad car. Who does that? Who does that? And that's okay. The fact that he admitted under oath that he tampered with other evidence. He bagged his own gun.
Hmm.
I have watched, now I know maybe I probably watched too much television, but I have never seen that done. I thought that somebody was supposed to come out and your superior or someone who does the investigation, and you're not supposed to handle this evidence yourself. You're supposed to hand it off to someone else who accounts for, well, that didn't happen here. He admitted that twice. He admitted to washing the blood off of his hands in the presence of his fiance, who was also a fellow cop. Now, I'm perplexed. I'm really not, but my mind is blown how we have black journalists like Jonathan Capehart and the typical, the usual suspects, some white people who don't want to admit that this is a problem that is and a result and an example of systemic racism in this country. It blows my mind that the narrative is still on whether Mike Brown really had his hands up or not, and because there's no proof that he did. And let me just say, just because the DOJ couldn't find proof that he had his hands up, that doesn't mean that they found proof that he didn't. They just couldn't prove that he did conclusively. But the fact that that is the narrative, and then I hear people say, well, yes, there are problems with racism and law enforcement in America, but Mike Brown isn't anybody's poster child for this. Nobody should have to be a poster child to be outraged that Darren Wilson got away with taking the life of someone who he encountered for the purpose of issuing a misdemeanor ticket. And along the way, he violated every procedure that he could have possibly violated. No, Mike Brown didn't have to be the poster child for anything for us to be outraged at what Darren Wilson did. But because Mike Brown was a black man in America, that was all that mattered. To completely wash away any guilt or complicity or responsibility that Darren Wilson and the Ferguson Police Department and his fiance, now his wife, have in helping him get away with what he got away with. That's why this is still important. Because, see, this is just a small part of what has been going on in this country with the incarceration of black men for centuries. Centuries. I can't remember who said it, but someone said very recently, especially in reference to the Black Lives Matter movement, none of this is new. I think it was Ta-Nehisi Coates who said it, actually. None of this is new. The only thing that's new are the cameras. So
No, I mean I agree. We watched a couple of documentaries today, and really been an interesting day for us while we were preparing for the show. But we just watching a couple of documentaries today. We saw this movie, a very controversial movie called Farewell Uncle Tom. We started off our morning with that.
That was your idea.
It was my idea. It was my idea. And if any of you know about the movie, you know that it was very controversial for its time, considered still controversial. It was banned in the United States and in Great Britain for a long time. I mean, it's really a graphic depiction of the horrors of the slave trade. And the filmmakers, it was an Italian film, the film was actually based off of historical documents. Everything in this movie actually came from historical documents, and the depiction is very graphic. I mean, Roots has nothing on this movie. It has
Man.
no, and I was telling Jackie, I said, I remember when they first released Roots. I was like in the sixth grade when Alex Haley's version of Roots came out in the '70s. I was a sixth grade student then, and I remember being so traumatized because nothing like that has ever been shown on American TV.
Mhm.
And I remember being so traumatized by Roots as a sixth grader that I went to school and a lot of other black kids who saw Roots because our parents let us watch it. And they went to work mad. We went to
Yeah.
school mad. And here we are sitting around looking at our white teachers, like, and so it was so much tension. Now I'm talking about middle school now. It was so much tension that our teachers had to call an assembly program and gather us children together in this assembly program and help us talk through our feelings. That's how, this was how much Roots, which if you look at it now, Roots is kind of pretty much tame for the day's audiences.
Mm-hmm.
But back at that time, look, we never saw anything like that. And so, when we had our white teachers talking to us, talking about, I know my home grade teacher, very wonderful lady, but she kept explaining to us, I know that Roots was horrible, but you have to understand, not all white people are guilty of this, so when they were telling us of this, and it's not right to hate everybody because listen, we know it's wrong, we know it's evil, and those people who did that were evil. We go home and found out that on our parents' jobs, a lot of them got into fights. That's how because in America we still do today. We don't like to address slavery. We don't like to address this ugly part of our past.
No.
And so good. So I told Jackie, I said, look, if they would have released Goodbye Uncle Tom during that time, there would have been race riots for real. That's how graphic this movie is.
Look, and I understand this movie, Goodbye Uncle Tom, was made by two Italian producers, and it was made in this genre of like, what do they call it?
Like
the shockumentary.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when it was released, now I had never heard of it before. Aptus knew about it. So, imagine when I realized he doesn't feel well. So, I'm like, okay, so you're not feeling well. So I guess we're not going to church today. No, we're not going to church today because I don't feel well. Let's watch some documentaries. Okay. I go downstairs to get some coffee and I come back upstairs and I'm like, goodbye, Uncle Tom. Dude, what the deuce is this? And I'm sitting there watching and it reminds me of like one of those campy over the top like Fellini movies with the weird music that doesn't quite fit. But everything is excessive but it's very dated, because it was made in the '70s. Yes. But once I got past the campiness and realized, no, wait a minute, it's intentionally made to be campy because that is the way those kind of movies were made by Italian directors back then. There's a whole genre of that kind of stuff.
Right.
But when I focused on the fact that what they were depicting in the movie, like Abda said, were based on historical incidences, documents that reflected the things that were done to human beings, they put that in the movie. And yeah, they made some of the ancillary actions real campy, but it was amazing when I was reading up about the movie how people responded to how the movie was made as opposed to the content of the movie.
That was very telling.
Right, because this is an example, I think, of when we say so frequently that even sometimes well-meaning white liberals don't get it. The cognitive dissonance is so deep in America that even people who don't mean to be biased and dismissive can be biased and dismissive. Um, Without even thinking about it. And I think this is a great example. So Roger Ebert, and if you knew who Roger Ebert was, you knew that he was the movie guy. He was I enjoyed watching his movie review shows. I trusted him to tell me which movies sucked and which movies
Yeah.
which movies I should really love, and usually he was right. I usually agreed with him. Ebert, he was married to
He was married to a
a
black woman.
black lady,
Yeah.
so you would think he gets it, right? You would think that Roger Ebert would see this movie and he would get it, but no, he saw this movie and said it was the most perverse exploitation of humanity that he had ever seen.
Yeah.
Not because of the content, but because of what was done, but because of the degradation that the Haitian extras put themselves through
To
to
tell the
make
story,
the
right?
movie, to tell the story.
Right.
And I'm reading that and I'm thinking, dude, you don't get it. Who better to tell that story? Honestly, if we weren't going to do it because it was about slavery in America.
Right.
I mean,
It was filmed in Haiti.
it was filmed in Haiti.
Right.
And Abdus made this point earlier when we were talking about it. He said, I mean, how could you be upset that the Haitians would put themselves through this degradation to tell this story? Who better than the Haitians to tell this story? Because remember, it was the Haitians who ended slavery in Haiti. It was the Haitians who rose up against not just the French, but the Spanish, the British, and the Americans who helped them.
Mm-hmm.
The little slaves in Haiti rose up against all those mighty powers to drive slavery out of Haiti. Who better to tell that story than the people who conquered slavery? But that completely lost on Roger Ebert. Completely lost was the fact that in order to tell the story, the actual story, as close as you can, about the level of degradation that was visited upon these people, these human beings, yeah, it's going to be real uncomfortable to sit through. And I'm sure it was uncomfortable for the extras to go to, but the story, to go through rather, but the story needed to be told. You see, it's the story, it's the history
Right.
that's important. Not the fact that the music was campy, not the fact that every white person in the movie was depicted as an evil caricature. Well, think about it. And we were talking about this earlier today. One of the workers, one of the white workers for the slave traders, when there's a horrendous rape scene that is in the movie, and every once in a while we're gonna recommend to you movies and documentaries that you should watch to help you understand this history better because we can't tell it all. We don't have that much breath in our body, and sometimes you just get tired of talking about it. Honestly, to tell you the truth, I'm just being real. These things help. But there is this, but none of this stuff is easy to watch. But I'm just telling you, you really should see this movie. So there's this horrendous rape scene in the movie. One of the workers for the slave traders goes into the holding room, whatever building where the female slaves are being held. And they go. There's four of these white guys. They go in there to rape these women. And as he's wading through these people, these slaves, he says something that a lot of people might miss, but we caught it. Um, he's going in to get to the room where the women are, and he says, "There's no work for poor white people like us."
Right.
Because of these black bastards.
That's
This is what he says in the movie. So I thought about, I heard him say that, and it's funny because when he said that, I was actually reading an article based on something else that was said in the movie to make sure, wait, is this stuff really based on true events? And it really is. And I heard that, and I was like, Abdus, whoa, stop the movie, stop that, rewind it. And to make sure that he said what he did, and I thought about that. And I thought about that in the context of white people who all the time say, not all white people, but of the white people who say, not all white people people owned slaves, so you can't blame slavery on all white people. Listen, it's not as if white people who did not own slaves had any kind of affinity or sympathy or pity for slaves, because it was slavery that basically eliminated the labor market for poor white people in the South. So even though you have most of the poor white people who couldn't own slaves because they were poor, you still had a class of people who hated slaves because they saw slaves as taking their job security away.
And you can easily transfer that to the immigration debate that we're having today and for the rise of Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And see that how, once again, poor working whites were led to believe that it wasn't the misuse of capitalism that took their jobs away, the factory jobs and all this other kind of stuff. It wasn't that type of raw capitalism that did that. No, it was these brown people that was coming into the country illegally that were doing that.
Right.
So it's easy to see how the elites, once again, or the wealthy, have always manipulated poor whites against people of color when it came to that. So even in what you said, Jack, is that it wasn't the fact that the institution of slavery was being used to prevent poor whites from working, and that you also see that the frustration in that also led to the brutality too.
Right.
It was the brutality because that's how human beings are.
Right.
When we when we start to blame someone for why we're not doing okay, we have a tendency to be brutal to the ones that we blame for our own circumstances, and you see that even today.
Yep.
So I mean, really, we have to. It's a lot of information in that movie that you could tie to today.
Yeah, and it's it was amazing to see these four white men who, we don't know what their story was before this was the only job they could get, but they were angry that this was the only job they could get. Watching these black bastards here, that's what the guy called them. So they have contempt for the wealthy white people who created this situation, but they also have contempt for these black bastards who they believe are taking their jobs. And this was a situation where Africans, it's not like they wanted to be here. The Africans would have gladly been like, "Oh, you want your job? Okay, fine. Take us home, and you can have all the work you want."
Right. And also while watching this movie, and we do recommend that you watch this movie. It's no longer banned, so you can watch it. But what I've really seen in this movie is the fact that a very strong case for reparations. Very strong case because one of the things that this movie showed was how many institutions profited, profited. I have a lazy tongue, y'all. Profited off of the institution of slavery, from insurance companies to banks, all kind of institutions. What they call merchant ships.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
if you were doing well in the United States, trust me, it was tied to the slave trade somehow, some way.
Yep.
So I mean, so now you're talking about that, and we seen this cruel irony of when they were dealing with the insurance, life insurance, and they were insuring slaves. This one company was, and the slaves were right there. I mean, the people who were enslaved were right there, and they're talking about them as if they don't exist. They had this one elderly man there, and they're filling out a policy for him, and they're trying to determine the value of how much they would insure him for. And they said, well, he's old, he's only going to live about a year anyway, so guy's standing right there,
Right.
So now you're talking about from birth to death, and I mean you're profiting off of them from the time they're born, and then even when they die, you profit, and yet these people who were made to basically enrich, these people, their descendants have nothing. And this is the reason why I'm called the current events in politics. You hear us refer to the wealth gap.
Mhm.
That's where that started.
Yep.
It
Yep.
started because these people who were kidnapped and forced over here and worked for nothing had no wealth. You know, they in this movie they also talked about documents where you had planters who wrote in their documents that these slaves would be passed down as a wealth inheritance
Mhm.
to their descendants.
Mhm.
What do you call it? Forever.
Right.
They,
In
yeah,
perpetuity.
in perpetuity. You know, so they were looking at this institution to be long lasting.
Mhm.
But the thing again, they understood that slaves being valuable property were to be passed so that their next generation could maintain wealth and become wealthier. That was not that opportunity wasn't given to people who were enslaved.
Yep.
And so when we talk about how this happened 400 years ago, we should all get over it and blah 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 blah. We have to understand that even to this day, the ramifications of enslaved people and the institution of slavery remains with us, which is the reason why you can go into anywhere in this country and find that the majority of black people are poor.
Mhm. Yep. Yep. I mean, and listen, people are always forcing black people to give these caveats. People are always tone policing when we talk about slavery and the legacy of slavery that we still endure today. We've always got people who respond with, not all white people. No, we didn't say all white people. Look, not all black people. This is my favorite one. I love this one so much. Well, not all black people are poor. Look at Oprah. Lord Jesus. If somebody throws Oprah Winfrey in my face one more time, I don't know Oprah. Oprah doesn't know me. She doesn't know my family. I can't get a loan from Oprah. I can't get the opportunities that Oprah had. Oprah herself will admit that she didn't make it on her own. She had people who gave her an opportunity, who took a chance on her.
Mainly not people, mainly white
Mainly,
people
mainly white
who
people.
chose her.
Who did?
Right.
Thank you.
And as uncomfortable as some of you may not want to hear this, but that is the reality when you're on this side of the fence in black America. Is
Mm-hmm.
that in order to make it, some white person has to choose you. And a lot of our existence and a lot of the way that we act and perform around here, and I don't mean perform in the negative sense, what I'm saying is what we do to maneuver through these difficult obstacles that's set up in our society is just so we can be the few chosen that white people will say, I will anoint you to succeed.
Yep.
And we don't like to hear this, but this is the reality in the society. Why do you think that 40% of black males are unemployed in this society? We're going to
Mm.
talk about that, but we don't like we don't like we don't like to hear this.
Right.
But for every Oprah that gets chosen, there's there's a whole lot that don't get chosen.
I mean,
So this is the reality. If and this is how in this society, black people, like we said this a couple of weeks ago, that we were going to bring you guys into the laundry room,
mm-hmm.
and we were going to
Oh,
tell you guys
ooh,
what we
pull
talk
up.
about in the laundry room. And one of the realities of the laundry room is the fact that most black people, through I don't care if it's respectability, politics, I don't care if it's the roadmap of the so-called keys to success.
Mm-hmm.
All of this has one thing in common: white people have to like you.
That's that. Look, this is these are the kinds of conversations that black people have. That well, not all black people, but a lot of black people. Those of us who were fortunate enough, and I consider myself fortunate that I grew up with a mother who not only integrated her own high school. I ain't never gonna not be proud of that. I am never gonna not be proud that my mom was that brave in a little smaller town that was basically run by the Klan. I'm never not gonna be proud of that. But who also didn't stop agitating for the truth. And when she came to Washington D.C., was not afraid to tell these white people on her job who were actively blocking her, I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not going to back down from you. But who also wasn't afraid to tell black people you slipping because all you doing is what we call it shucking and jiving. That's what we call it. Shucking and jiving for the man. You're just performing for the man so they can choose you because you want to be seen as not and that not like the rest of those Negroes over there. You want them to be seen. You want them to see you as different. You're better than that goes on. And again,
Well,
this.
I'm sorry. I just reminded of the movie we saw last night
Uh-huh.
of the Man in 3D, where you have this black man who works in a furniture store, and he's a
Uh-huh.
floor sales clerk,
Right.
and he believes that he's getting this promotion because
Uh-huh.
the store manager is moving on, who's a black man, mind you.
Mhm.
The store manager is a black man, and he basically kind of, gave this black salesman, basically promising him that you're going to be my successor. So the guy who owns the store, white man, he comes in and and they're basically going through their thing. And Jackie and I laugh because as Black Americans, we know how this goes. So he goes to the white guy, and his whole tone of voice changes. So the white guy asks him, he said, we need a team player. We need you to be a team player. Oh, yes, sir. I'm all about the store, sir. You can count on me, sir. Yes, whatever you need, I'm here. And
I'm
he
here
said,
for the
yeah,
peaceful,
I'm
for the
here for,
successful
yeah,
transition of the
right.
store
I'm here for
manager.
this successful transmission. And so he has to, because we understand in Black America, most of us understand that we have to make white people comfortable. This is the thing that we've been groomed from birth. You have to make white folks comfortable. Has been our conditioning. So Jackie and I laugh when his whole tone of voice changed. Yeah, sir, I'm all about the store, sir. You can count on me. So then when he found out that the store owner was going to give the store manager job to his son who doesn't know anything about the funeral business, now all of a sudden it's like,
Right.
well, what the fuck did you do? Oh yeah, you can kiss my butt. Then, and so we had to laugh at that because there was an article that was written a long time ago. I think Time Magazine had it where they had a black face and they had two sides, and it was on the cover of Time, I believe, or Newsweek, one of the magazines.
Mm-hmm.
And they basically dealt with the two faces that we as Black Americans have to play in this country,
Mm-hmm.
and especially on the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
This constant chameleon that we have to be
Right.
because of the racial politics in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And that in order for us to survive, and in order for us to make it in this country, we can't be too much of who we really are.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is something that we don't like to talk about. We
Not in
don't like
public.
to admit,
Not
and
in
not in
polite
public.
company.
Right. But this is something that a lot of times happens a lot. And so
Mm-hmm.
so so it was really funny when we saw that because we laughed because we understood. You
Yep,
know.
yep. Because we were like, when is the brother gonna come out?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
When is he gonna stop being, Mr. Polite guy when he finds out that yeah, they're not giving that job to you, bruh. They're giving
Right.
that job to the store
Right.
owner's son. You're basically gonna train this store owner's son for the job they promised you, and they're
Exactly.
telling you that the price of you keeping your job is to stuff your dignity down the toilet. That's what. And see, when we realize that's the price of admission for us, then the game is over for a lot of us.
Right.
I mean, the
And he walked
game.
off. He quit.
He did. All of a sudden, he became seriously. He became Quan from round the way. He
Hmm.
was nah. What you not gonna do is yeah.
But the sad reality is that when you live in a country where you don't own anything,
Mhm.
and when you live in a country where your existence, your livelihood depends on other people liking you,
Mhm.
when it depends on other people's perception of you, then you have to play these little games.
Right.
You have to navigate through all of that.
Yep.
White people don't really have to do that as much. And so when we start talking about white privilege and we start talking about those other things, that's what we mean. It's not to condemn whiteness because that's not the point. The
Mhm.
point is that this social construct that we have here has has its roots in our slavery past.
Right.
That's why we can't just get over it so easily.
That's the thing, and I hope you all notice I'm trying to play with the with the scenes so that you see him talking and you can see me responding to him talking. I can't put his scene in little picture in mind yet. I don't know
Well,
why.
we'll figure it
We'll
out.
figure it out, but we're almost there. We're doing pretty good, I think. So so this, huh?
No, I was gonna say I was trying to get on the chat
Oh,
with some of the guys. I can't do it right
why can't
now.
you get on the
I
chat?
don't know. It's but
Really? Oh
I'm still trying to figure this thing out
no.
myself.
So I mean, so the thing is, so why would we even bring that movie up? Because we're supposed to be talking about mass incarceration today, right? So the reason that is important in this whole conversation about mass incarceration is because slavery was really just like the mental conditioning. It was like the what is it called, the control
Yeah,
room.
yeah, yeah.
What were you gonna say?
Well, I was gonna say peculiar institution. That's what I
Well,
heard a
yeah,
lot.
that definitely that, but slavery was like the control room for how to prepare 4 million people to live with and almost be accepting of the concept of always being enslaved in some way. Because you see, this entire system in this country was built on the premise that there was a particular group of people, two really, but they tried to kill entirely one group of people, the Native Americans. But they couldn't kill all of them. But they figured, well, we got the population of them down enough where we can control them in another way. But then what are we going to do with these 4 million African descendants? Because we can't go on a killing campaign of them like we did with the Native Americans. We can't do that again. So how do we control them to make sure that they don't have access to the wealth that they built?
Mm.
Well, we make sure that we create and maintain systems that effectively keeps them out of the running for ever being able to participate fully in society. And at first they did it with the convict lease system. After emancipation, after slavery, they did it with the convict lease system. They did it with black codes. They did it with what were called pig codes. They did it with vagrancy laws, basically criminalizing things that were never criminal acts before. Like one of the most famous and widely used vagrancy laws. But first of all, the vagrancy law wasn't a thing too much before slavery because vagrancy assumes that you have nowhere to go, you don't have a home, you don't have a job, right? So that wasn't really a criminally enforced state of being before emancipation.
Yeah, because I mean, if you was a slave, you was on your plantation.
Right,
So I
right,
mean, so there was no vagrancy because you
exactly.
were owned.
Right, and right,
Then they freed you, and then it was like, okay, you're free, but you can't come here. You
right,
can't
right,
sit here. You can't
right,
go over there.
right.
You
And
know.
then the other part of the vagrancy laws was that you were unemployed. All of a sudden, it became a criminal offense to be unemployed. Now you have 4 million people in this country. All of a sudden, that there were, and if you know the history of slavery, you know that the United States received the least amount of slaves,
5%.
just 5% of the millions of slaves
10.7 million.
who were exported from Africa. We only received 5%. So that comes out to like not even 500,000 people in the original slave importation. We grew to over 4 million people over 2.5 centuries. And that was not done just through natural, people pairing up and, bunning up and, oh, I love you. And no, that was done primarily through rape and rape by slave masters and forced breeding.
Breeding farms that were set up.
Breeding, that's in the movie also.
Yep.
And the psychological toll, can you imagine the psychological toll that one has to carry, that a black man has to carry, when he is forced to rape children who look like him in order to produce another generation of slaves for the master who is forcing him to rape a child. And he can never have the benefit of nurturing that relationship with that child that he raped or forced to rape, or nurturing and raising the child that's the product of that forced rape. Because in a way, that black man was raped too.
Nor can he refuse to do it.
He can't refuse it, not if he wants to live.
If he wants to live,
He
right.
can't refuse to do it. So there's this scene in this movie, Goodbye Uncle Tom, where there's this uh, slave, this African slave who is clearly out of his mind. And on the surface you would think, oh, he's giddy because he's about to, get some with a young girl. But when you and the filmmakers were kind of brilliant in making this movie the way they did, because you have to look at this movie with this unflinching, very unafraid eye to look into the faces of madness. That how do you carry that? You've got little girls who are 12 and 13 years old who are being led to be raped so that they can produce a baby that will be a slave for their master. Why did they do it? Because the slave trade was outlawed by that time. They couldn't buy slaves who were being brought from Africa. So and they didn't want to get rid of the free labor. So these geniuses came up with, well, how am I going to get a whole nother generation, a whole nother crop of slaves? Oh, I know. We'll breed them like horses. And that's what they did.
That's what they did.
That's what they did. And interestingly enough, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. One of the most prominent slave breeders in the South was actually a black man.
Yes. Yep.
Now,
And look, that when you talk about the truth, and we always say on this show, unapologetic truth. Yes. I don't care. I don't care who it is. If you're guilty, you're guilty.
That's right.
And a black man was the largest slave breeder in this country.
That's right. And to me, that speaks to, again, the level of psychosis that, I mean, when you look at it, when you look at every story of the oppression of any group of people, I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's the Jews. I don't care if it was the Italians. I don't care if it was the Poles. I don't care if it's the Irish. There's always the sellout, right? There's a sellout in every oppression story. Thank you. That's right. The word I'm looking for. There's always collaborators. So it's not unusual. It's not unheard of to know that there were Africans who participated in the trading of Africans who were so. That's not, because collaborating with the enemy is kind of a human thing, because we're greedy.
And because we want to ensure our own survival.
Yeah, right. I mean, on one hand, you got people who are just flat out greedy. And on the other hand, you've got people who see, they are treacherous. And if I don't want to go the way of the fate of those people, to survive, I got to deal with them. And if I got to sacrifice you to keep me and mine alive, that's what I'm going to do. So it's not one of those easy one or the other, A or B, black or white, pun completely intended right there, kind of stories. So the fact that a black man was able to rise to the status of one of the largest slave breeders in the South, that's shocking, but it's not. I mean, human beings, in order to escape the kind of degradation and torture that they have endured themselves and that they see isn't going to end anytime soon, they'll do anything. Some of us will do anything to escape that. And for this guy, do you remember his name?
William Ellison.
William Ellison. For William Ellison, this was the escape. I'm never going to forget that name. I see. I'm bad with names. For this guy, for William Ellison, this was the escape. Now, for all of the other white slave owners and white slave breeders, he was still just a nigger. But he was a smart nigger though. Because he knew how to breed. Other than, I know some of y'all are real uncomfortable with that word, so I'm not going to say it anymore. But it did, the price of his soul and the continued degradation and abuse of his own people didn't matter to him, because that's how collaborators think.
And when you really go back to the thing about the Oprah Winfrey argument, not that Oprah Winfrey is on any kind of par with this guy, but what I'm saying is that in any system, oppressive system, there's always going to be somebody that's going to make it.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So what you going to tell the slaves during William Ellison's time? Oh, if you work real hard and please your master, you could be William Ellison. I mean, because William Ellison was a slave. He
Right.
started off as a slave. And it was white Southerners, for some reason, he was the only person, just to give you a little background. William Ellison was very handy with fixing things and fixing, I think, the cotton machinery and
Mhm.
stuff that a lot of the whites didn't know how to do. And because the slave class were the most skilled when it came to was skilled labor,
Mhm.
we got to remember slaves were not unskilled.
Right.
So because whites depended on slave labor.
Mhm.
So what happened is that this guy was a genius at fixing this kind of machinery.
Mhm.
And so again, when we talk about whites choosing you, he was one of the lucky ones in that system
Right.
that the whites liked,
Uh huh.
and he wind up getting favors from them to the point where he was able to buy one of the biggest plantations
Mhm.
in South Carolina, and he started to involve himself
Mhm.
in the breeding and enslavement of his own people. So would that argument would have worked back then if you just work? I mean, he started off as a slave. If you just work real hard and please your master, hey, who knows? You could be
You might
William
be
Ellison.
William Ellison
Right, right.
too.
There's always going to be people who make it,
And
but
that's
you can't
mhm.
use that as an excuse to indict everyone else that doesn't.
Exactly. Especially when you realize that the people who make it are part of the plan.
Right.
I mean, they're seriously people believe because we like I said, you're in the laundry room now. You're in the laundry room of woke black Americans.
That's right.
That's
You got some sheets coming out the dryer. You ready to fold them?
and we talk about this all the time where we talk about black people who have made it who are always propped up as the examples by white society. And see, if you would just work hard, you could be like Oprah, or you
Right.
could be like Michael Jordan, or you could be like
Like Barack
just
Obama.
Barack
Yeah.
Obama, blah blah blah. Well, they always gonna let some of us through. Because if they don't let some of us through, they can't use that argument. They can't keep telling us all you have to do is XYZ and you too can be successful in America if there are no examples of successful black people in this country.
What they don't tell you though is that Oprah Winfrey started off in the media, and when she was given breaks by people who were able to do something for her. They don't tell you that Barack Obama was able to get into Harvard because his father, I mean his grandfather, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
I mean he benefited from having a white grandfather. How many of us could have that? So I mean, so when they talk about you could be like this and you could be like that, they never tell the whole story.
Right. Right.
There's no one in this country, whether you're white or black, that can sit up there and say I'm self-made. No one is
Nobody.
self-made.
No one. Let's get this straight. Let's get this whole narrative straight about success in America. No one is successful in this country who did not have help from someone else.
Right.
Not a soul. Nobody's grandfather came here with nothing and worked the land with the toil of his hands and made himself wealthy
That's
by
right.
his own works alone. That's a lie. The land that he worked was given to him by the United States government.
Mm-hmm.
And that land was denied Native Americans and black people. It was stolen from Native Americans and it was denied free black people. And when free black people were able to establish something in this country, like the Tulsa, Oklahomas, like the Rosewood, Floridas, and all of the other successful black communities like that, then angry white people, basically in one summer, red summer of 1921, just decided, you know what? Y'all can't have nothing, and destroyed all of that. So that was taken from us too. And then white people took what they stole from black people who built it successfully and profited off of what they stole. So I'm done with entertaining the arguments from white people who don't want to look at history, and even black people who don't want to. Because please, white people, don't think that we are all just like we hate white people because all of y'all are evil. No, most people in general in this country are woefully misinformed as to the actual history of not just their family's legacy of what great grandparents did when they got here off the boat from whatever country, but the government's hand in actually helping European immigrants and denying Native Americans, Black people, those same opportunities. Everybody is ignorant of that history. What I am tired of entertaining is this idea that I have to be guilty and I have to police my tone when I'm talking about what was done because some white people are uncomfortable with it because they don't want to face the truth. I can't help you with that.
And what we're also trying to dismantle is the fact that if we don't deal with the legacy of slavery, then we can't deal with why there's 40% unemployment rate of black males.
Yep.
We can't deal with a mass incarceration rate of black males that are 10,000 for every 100,000.
Right.
300
right.
to every 100,000 for black females.
Right.
We can't deal with the fact that black people are always have been permanently underclass in the society. Why is it that Latino immigrants who come here with a college degree have more access to the wealth of this country than even Black Americans with a college degree?
Right.
See, all of this stuff, all of the pieces matter. Mm-hmm. And so until we start to have these difficult conversations and realize that until we deal with the evil effects of slavery, then we can't deal with the residue that still remains with us today.
That's right.
And so we are going to have that more perfect union that's in that document we always talk about, that more perfect union, then we have to start dealing with the things that make us uncomfortable.
That's right. I mean, and so one of those things is mass incarceration. I mean, mass incarceration isn't new. Like we said, it's been going on since emancipation. It was the way to continue to maintain that free labor force of former slaves. So, you got all these people who are now suddenly quote unquote free. They leave the plantations, they have no homes to go to, so now they're homeless. So you criminalize not having a home all of a sudden. And because they are no longer forced to work for free, now they don't, and white people weren't going to hire them, so now they don't have jobs. So now you make not having a job illegal. So that's what vagrancy laws were. That's what black codes were. And black codes and vagrancy laws preceded Jim Crow. So vagrancy laws and black crow and the black codes were the foundations for the creation of the convict lease system, where law enforcement basically just arrested a bunch of newly freed slaves for being homeless and unemployed. And they would basically take them back to the plantations that they were just freed from and force them to work off their time, serve their time working on the plantations they were just freed from.
We didn't think that an institution that was being maintained for a couple hundred years was just all of a sudden just going to just fade away.
Right. I love what Dr. Joy DeGroy Leary said in this other documentary we watched today. We had documentary overload today. We feel so smart and damaged. But she said, so what? Emancipation happened. Not everybody set all the slaves free just because the government said so.
Right.
But see, we believe that. We believe that lie. We actually believe that in a country where the institution of slavery built the economy of the South into the most powerful economy in the Western world over 2.5 centuries, that all of a sudden, just because Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, all these people who benefited, all this massive wealth and political power, mind you, just said, you know what? He said we should free all the slaves, so let's just do it. We actually believe that's what happened. That's how misinformed we choose to be. Because that doesn't even make logical sense. Does it? To you? I'm sure it doesn't. So here you have the southern states especially doing everything they can to hold on to their slave labor in the form of the convict lease system. And the convict lease system is the predecessor of today's mass incarceration. It's been going on that long. The intentional targeting and enslavement of black men, and imprisonment, it's the same thing.
The incarceration of black bodies has never ended in this country.
It has never ended, to the point that the 13th Amendment to the Constitution actually says that as long as you have been convicted of crime, you can still be subjected to slavery. That's how committed this country is to the institution of slavery to this day. So why is mass incarceration such a big deal still? So let me see if I can get the other screen up for you. So we were watching one of the things we were watching yesterday. We say all the time we got a bunch of people we watch who we really enjoy watching on YouTube. A bunch of truth tellers. Yvette Carnell is one of those, and she was talking about mass incarceration on her show, and she gave a statistic that I am not entirely sure is accurate. You still can't get on the chat?
No, and I want to know if the buffering is still
it's a little slow.
Yeah. I can't get on the chat.
Okay, we're sorry. The buffering is really slow. We're going through some issues with our internet service provider. I think they're mad at us because we downgraded our service to eliminate the cable and just keep the internet and the phone. And I think they're just punishing us. That's just me though, because I'm paranoid like that. But anyway, so she gave a statistic that I'm not sure is entirely accurate, but I don't think it's far off. That like you said, the incarceration rate for African American men is 10,000 African American men incarcerated for every 100,000 African Americans in this country, right? And for black women, it's 300 black women who are incarcerated per every 100,000 black women.
Right.
This is why you got issues over there.
Well, I'm trying to. Sorry, this is not brick by brick, y'all. This is called current event of politics, so I don't know.
But oh, it's just spooling when it does that.
No, I'm getting a brick by brick, so yeah, this is not brick by brick. So.
Oh, well, that's interesting. Never a dull moment with the Luke Mines, that's for sure. So, so this is why it's important. This is, if you can see this website, this is from the NAACP. It's the Criminal Justice Fact Sheet. All of this targeting of black men, keeping black men in prison, and the most black men who are in prison for low level drug offenses. And this is where the war on drugs comes into this discussion. And what the war on drugs really is the war on poor people and black people. So, according to the NAACP, incarceration trends in America, from 1980 to 2008, the number of people incarcerated in America quadrupled from roughly 500,000 to 2.3 million people. Just from 1980 to 2008, we increased the the people who are in prison by 4 times, from 500,000 to 2.3 million people. Here is where the racial disparity is apparent, and here is where you can't tell me that this isn't by design. African Americans now constitute nearly 1 million of the total 2.3 million incarcerated population. How is it that if we are not targeted by the penal system, by the criminal justice system, by law enforcement, if black people aren't targeted by this system, how do we accidentally make up half of the population of everybody in prison? That makes no sense. That is statistically impossible to do if you're not intending to do it. And then African Americans are incarcerated at nearly 6 times the rate of whites. If there is no racial profiling, no targeting of black people specifically in this country by the criminal justice system, explain to me how we are incarcerated at 6 times the rate of white people. You don't do that by accident. That's not an oops, I accidentally arrested six more black people than I did white people today. Not if you have police departments and law enforcement resources that are equally distributed everywhere in this country. But we know that they're not. So here we have a system in this country where we have more people in prison in this one country than anywhere else in the world. We have more people in prison in the United States than China has in their prisons. And we still want to believe almost half of those people in our prisons today are African Americans, even though we make up just 14% of the entire population. The people who make up just 14% of the population are incarcerated at a rate of 6 times more than white people in this country. But somehow we still want to believe that there is no racial bias, no intentional racial discrimination and targeting in law enforcement and criminal justice in this country. You've got to be kidding me. There's no way these numbers can exist if there is not an intentional, concerted effort to make it this way. But see, this is why when we have these conversations, we can't talk about this from an emotional perspective. Yes, it's angering, it's enraging, but the facts are what are important. The data, as Yvette Carnell always said, you can't argue with the data. You might not like my perspective. You might not like our opinion here at Coffee Current Events and Politics in Luke Mon Nation. You might not like Live at 5 because we're too black for you. That's okay. I've been actually told that before. I'm too black and I'm too angry. I'm like, okay. But when I look at stuff like this, explain to me how I'm not supposed to be angry. I don't understand why you're not. How are you not angry?
That should be that's really the question. How is it that we in a free society that we allow a so-called free society? How is it that we allow something like that to continue to exist? I mean, why are we not outraged that 40% of black males in D.C., Baltimore, New York, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Chicago? Why are we not upset that we have such large unemployment amongst black males? You know, which leads into crime, which leads into all this other kind of stuff. Why are we? You know, that's the question. Why are we not upset by this? This is the land of opportunity, but
right.
Not, but it ain't the land of opportunity for 40% of black males.
Right, and all of those cities that list of cities, those are all the cities that black people from the South migrated to during the Great Migration. Every single one of those cities. So you can't come on now. How many coincidences do you need before you start to realize, wait, this isn't a coincidence. This is a plan. He's chatting with somebody. And enjoying it. This isn't coincidence, y'all. This is not an instance of, a few black people being criminal minded and being lazy. I've never understood how people who were forced to come here to do work that white people didn't want to do were worked by force from sun up to sundown 365 days a year for no money, but at the same time we were also notoriously lazy. I don't understand how that happened. But hey, whatever people had to tell themselves to sleep at night, because you realize that's where a lot of these stereotypes came from, right? The lies that people who were either perpetrating this system or who benefited from this system or who wanted to spread it and maintain it had to tell themselves so they could sleep at night.
Well, because you cannot be a part of such an inhumane system such as slavery and hold on to your own humanity unless you had to put some kind of mythos in place, unless you had to justify it somehow.
Right.
And look, if slavery is too far in the past for you, then the same folks who operate this inhumane system of capitalism
It's the same,
have to tell themselves
the
that
same
right. They have
lies.
to tell them. They have to justify why New York City has more homeless today than they did 100 years ago. You know,
What
they have
was
to.
that percentage?
Well, I don't know the percentage right now, but I know that you have more people in homeless people in New York City than you had when Central Park was called Hooverville. When Central
Right.
Park was made up of homeless people,
Hmm.
DC has the highest number of homeless people now than they ever had before. So you have to, so the people who still run the inhumane system of capitalism, at least the way that it's practiced here, they have to tell themselves that no, it's not that we're being unjust. It's that those people just don't want to do anything.
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
they're, or they have to tell themselves, well, there's winners and losers in life. They just are the losers.
Uh-huh.
Everybody can't be a winner. Everybody can't have a ribbon. So we
We
tell
all
ourselves
can't
this,
get a trophy.
that we convince ourselves that it's okay to have people who lose out in the richest country in the world.
Hmm.
Why are we not outraged by that?
Right, right. And when we're talking about unemployment rates among black men in these cities that are as high as 40%, and you are like shocked that there is still a wealth gap between black and white people, and that it's as enormous as it is. I, you've got to see the connection, because so you have to tell this story about the funeral industry that you told me.
All right, I know we're coming up against time, but all right. I used to work in the funeral industry not too long ago, and I saw firsthand the wealth gap being displayed in front of my face during funeral time. And we buried, and when I say we, the funeral home that I was working with at the time, and basically our clientele was poor black people in Newark and Irvington, New Jersey, and in the surrounding area. And I would watch black relatives of the deceased come into our office and trying to make funeral plans. And the funeral director would try to find like the most inexpensive funeral package to bury their loved one, and say that the funeral package was probably no more than about $2,500, and that's the whole funeral, burial plot, everything. And to watch 20 members of the deceased family, all black, who couldn't even come up with $1,000 amongst themselves.
Among 20 people.
Amongst 20 people.
That's
Who
what?
couldn't even come up with $1,000.
That's like $50. That's less than $50 a person.
This is after the funeral director had gotten the funds from government sources and everything else, and the balance was $1,000. And you had 20 members of that family who couldn't even come up with $1,000 to bury a loved one.
Now, this is why this conversation about slavery and um, convict lease system leading to mass incarceration, and how our communities were destroyed when we built communities after emancipation, and how we were never given reparations for everything that was stolen from us. You're talking about a group of people in this country who were intentionally denied access to financial opportunity.
I mean, yeah, because when you look at it, it just wasn't just not being paid from slavery. It
Right.
was actually being denied housing.
Mhm.
It was redlining.
Mhm.
It was the unscrupulous practices of banking.
Yep.
There
Yep.
was not black GIs not getting the full benefit of the GI Bill.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, we can go on and on and on and on. Even as recently as the recent housing collapse back in '08,
Mhm.
we're seeing the largest transfer of disappearance of black wealth.
Mhm.
I mean, we didn't even have any.
We did.
And
We
then you
didn't
talk,
right. We didn't
right,
recover from it.
right. And so you talk about we didn't even have much, and then the
And we
housing,
lost that.
right, and then the housing collapse. First of all, and we've talked about this on the show, the black community was already targeted by predatory lenders and all of these people who basically scammed black folks out of their to signing these uh, um, loaded contracts,
Mhm.
and and so now then when that collapsed upon itself, then all of a sudden now you saw what little wealth most blacks had, that was gone.
Yep.
And then what was to justify it? oh well, they should have been able to read the contracts a little bit better. It's their fault.
Right, right, and that came from Democrats too. It wasn't just Republicans saying that hateful crap.
Well, you
It
have now what they're saying is that oh no, it's not the predatory lending that was the problem.
uh-huh.
It wasn't the fact that the banks lied to you.
Mm-hmm.
No, it wasn't that you didn't have a loan.